Kia ora, good afternoon, and welcome to Connecting the Dots podcast. As you can see, I've renamed my podcast, my shows that we will do on location, like when I go to my National Trust places with my sons that you see on my channel. They are the Eye in the Sky show. My podcast will now be called Connecting the Dots. So this evening on Connecting the Dots podcast, we are going to talk about the Cleveland torso murders. Now, I have a confession to make. This is a bit embarrassing for me, but I'm not above admitting I was wrong. I made a quick video before, previously on my channel, which I have now taken down because I was wrong. I had originally said that I felt they were sacrificial murders. But I saw a video today, just before actually, I saw a video that had information in it that I hadn't noticed before, or that hadn't jumped out at me before, that once I saw it, I started looking into it, connecting the dots, because that's what I do with my podcast. It's all intuitive. I get an intuitive hit and then I do my research to connect the dots, hence the term Connecting the Dots podcast. And what I found was very interesting, and I had completely changed my mind about the Cleveland torso murders, hence why I have taken the original video down. I could hear my father talking to me. It was like I was sitting in our living room when I was a little girl, and I could hear him telling me things, teaching me things. And watching this video, I was like, oh my God. And then when I connected the dots, it just was so obvious that I can't believe that even people like Elliot Ness has missed this. So basically, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. In the 1930s, they started finding these bodies of homeless men and women all over Cleveland and the Cuyahoga River, dismembered, decapitated, castrated, all sorts of horrendous things, like, just chopped in half, disemboweled, kidneys cut out, stomachs cut up, like all sorts of things. Some of them were alive, some of them weren't. Some were identified, some of them weren't. There were 12 initially, but they think there might have been as many as 20, possibly, I feel, maybe even more, especially now that I know what I know. I think that, firstly, I think there were 2 killers who worked together. And I think that, they were medical students. Now you go, why are you saying that? Firstly, one of the things on this video, somebody sent in a postcard taunting Elliot Ness, making up all this hoo-ha. But the thing that jumped out at me is that their writing was all in capitals. Now, usually they will say that people who write in capital letters and block letters, most ransom notes are written in block letters and capital letters. But they usually say that people who write in capital letters have narcissistic tendencies and they like to show off. So their writing is big and bold, like, look at me, aren't I wonderful, here I am, world, notice me kind of thing. But the one thing my father told me was that... Sorry, just something happened at the corner of my eye. Sorry. My father told me when I was little, people who write in capitals, because my dad wrote in capitals. And I used to say to him, why do you always write in capitals? And he said to me, people who write in capitals usually write in capitals because it's faster. So if you see anyone writing in capitals, it's because they have a job where they have to write a lot of things really fast. My father was in the military, so he said you will often find people in law enforcement, people in the military, people in the medical profession will write in capital letters because they'll write faster because it's quicker to get it out. And they don't want to have to sit and decipher their writing, so they do it all in capitals, to make it clearer and easier to understand, because they're constantly writing and constantly having to take notes, and that it's easier to just do it big and bold and get it right, so that they're not having to write it and then rewrite it, because this was back in the days where we didn't have computers and everything was filed in cabinets and that, so it was easier to make it clear to get the job done and get it out of the way, so that you could move on to the next bit of writing you had to do. And that always stuck with me. It always stuck with me. The other interesting thing is that a lot of the victims had medical scars. They had, surgery scars. One of them had 6 tattoos on his arm, which the other thing that my dad taught me is that back in those days, you would often find it was people who were in the military had a lot of tattoos. And if this man was in a war, and he had to have medical training. Now, interestingly enough, one of the suspects apparently was a World War One medical doctor. But there was a hospital down the road from the Cuyahoga River that was built in 1837. It was called the City Hospital and the Metro Health System. Apparently, there were 4 hospitals, kind of like all in one. But the one at the Cuyahoga River and in Cleveland, it was a hospital for the poor and the insane. So when the poor were sick and infirm, or the insane, they would go to this particular hospital. Now the interesting thing is that it offered the best in medical science and was a training ground for doctors and nurses, and it became a research and education hospital in the early 19th century. So by the time these murders were taking place, it was a training hospital. It was a medical educational training facility where doctors and nurses would come and train on the job, learning to do cutting edge medical things. And I think that's why most of the bodies, I think one of the training doctors cut the bodies up a certain way, from the clavicle, because some of the bodies, the bodies were cut very distinctly, sort of from the clavicle area, and was very precise, and that sort of thing. And then the other one, the second murderer, cut very differently, where it was all about the organs and that sort of thing. They were 2 very distinct different types of murders, and I think it was depending on what they were wanting to train on. And now the thing is that body snatching, or what Burke and Hare did, I think that because there's where the bodies all were found and where the victims lived, because they were all poor. Some of them were, I know one of them worked in a psychiatric hospital and then lost his job and, ended up destitute. So they all seem to have connections to hospitals, either for treatment or for employment through military service, or, because they needed medical care. And I think that they met their doctors there. And because, unfortunately, even in the 20th century, they're still doing it now, but, even as late as the 1950s and that, they were taking people, poor people, and I know that they liked to do it with African American slaves as well. It was the poor, the insane, the ones getting executed, and slaves, they were considered disposable. And I think that these 2 students did a Burke and Hare. I think they wanted to be like Burke and Hare, because they started out as grave robbers, and then when they started putting cages and that over the graves to protect the cadavers, once people realised what was going on, they started killing people and then taking the fresh corpses to the medical school and getting a lot of money for it. And I think that these students didn't take the bodies to the medical school. I think that they took them to, like dissect them privately, to, do autopsies and study them privately in various locations, and then would dump the bodies. Some were found with body parts in, like potato sack kind of things, and some were just, left out in the open. And that's what I really think it is. I think the Cleveland Torso murders were two murderers who were from the medical school just up the road. And then they just dumped their bodies and got away with it. So it's not, I don't think it was sacrificial at all. So, that's a little bit embarrassing, but like I said, I'm not above admitting I was wrong in anything, and I certainly wouldn't want to present anything to the world that was wrong. But I'm presenting my findings now, and I don't think I'm wrong. I'll leave links in the description box below so you can see how they're talking about, body snatching and that in the 20th century. And like you can see clearly when you look at all the victims, they have a lot of things in common with the military and the hospital. And one of the suspects was a World War One military doctor, field doctor, like, doctor of medicine and during wars. And I don't necessarily think that he was one of them, but I mean, you don't know. It's just, it seems to be that hospital, everyone seems to have that hospital in connection, either through, because they were patients or they worked there, either because, they, from war injuries, or apparently they were considered a cutting edge hospital, even, for the poor. It was cheap in that, but they because they were a training school and they wanted to give, the teachers and the doctors and nurses and that the best teaching, it was considered to be cutting edge for its time. And of course they welcomed in these patients because then they got to do all these things for them and learn as they went. And I think some of these people were marked as victims, and I think some of these student doctors followed them home and chose them for their evil doings in order to learn medicine, because they were homeless and prostitutes and drunks and that sort of thing, and they were considered disposable. So I'll put it out there. See what you think. Look at the description box below, and I'm sorry that I got it so wrong last time, but you live and learn. I'm just glad I know now. So I will speak to you later. Enjoy. Ka kite anō. Mwah.